3 days after my father died, my brother handed me a garbage bag for my clothes, an eviction notice, and kicked me out onto the street with less than $400. For 7 years, I was the one who cared for our family, sleeping beside my father's hospital bed, checking his medicine and warming his blankets. But the moment he passed away, my brother erased me from his life. Desperate for a place to sleep, I used my very last folded dollar bill to buy an abandoned, creepy Victorian house at a county foreclosure auction 3,000 miles away, a property opening for just $1. But when I unlocked the front door and forced open a padlocked attic room, I found a child's photograph from 2001 showing me with a woman I was told never existed, exposing a 25-year-old family secret that changed everything I knew about who I was. At 25, Dora Vance stood on the curb with a garbage bag of clothes because the people she had spent 7 years protecting had decided she no longer belonged to them. Her fingers shook around the torn handle, but she refused to cry where Julian could see. She had learned one rule from her grandmother: never let another person's cruelty decide your worth. Then Julian shut the front door behind her. 3 days after their father died, after Dora had spent every night sleeping beside his hospital bed, her brother had given her an eviction notice, a revised will, and less than $400. Her sedan waited at the curb. In her coat pocket sat one crisp dollar, folded into a tiny triangle by Evelyn, the grandmother who taught her that broken things could still be repaired. And just like that, the house she had called home was gone. Dora drove away without knowing where she would sleep, but one question followed her. Why had Julian been so desperate to remove her after their father's death? The answer seemed buried inside papers she had never been allowed to read. One detail bothered her most. A property she had never heard of had been crossed out by hand. That was when Dora stopped at a gas station, spread the papers across the hood, and noticed something stranger. Beside the crossed-out property was a reference from a town called Blackwood, 3,000 miles away. Beneath it was a handwritten instruction in her father's writing. Do not let Dora see the original record. Her mouth went dry. Why would her father hide a record from his own daughter? By midnight, Dora was driving east, with that folded dollar pressed beneath her palm at every red light. She did not know the road ahead would lead toward a house abandoned for decades, a place locals refused to discuss after dark. She only knew she needed somewhere no family member could take away. But when the county sign for Blackwood appeared, Dora noticed a name beneath it that made her grip the wheel tighter. Vance Road. If you enjoy stories about people who lose everything, only to discover that their past may be hiding something they were never meant to know, stay with Dora for this one. Because the deeper she goes into Blackwood, the more she realizes that being thrown out may have been the beginning of something she was never supposed to find. Tell us in the comment where you're watching from tonight. Dora counted quarters at a gas station outside Flagstaff, Arizona, then drove until her eyes burned. She slept in her aging sedan at an Ohio rest stop, turning the heater on for 10 minutes each hour to save gas. In Pennsylvania, she washed dishes before sunrise and cleaned motel rooms after dark. Every single dollar went into one small emergency cash envelope. By the New York-Pennsylvania border, that envelope held $14. Then, the sedan's battery died without warning in a snow-covered parking lot outside a diner. Dora turned the key. Nothing. Her breath fogged the windshield as the temperature dropped below zero. She stepped outside, lifted the hood, and stared at the dead engine. She sat back down in the darkness and dropped her keys. They struck the floor with a sharp click. Nobody was coming. Nobody knew where she was. The thought she had fought since leaving California finally reached her. Maybe she really was completely alone. Then her fingers found the folded dollar in her pocket. Dora unfolded it and smoothed the paper against her knee. Evelyn had given it to her 10 years earlier, on her birthday. You never know when a small thing will matter, her grandmother had said. Dora folded the bill into its triangle again. This time she held it until her shaking stopped. The next morning, a diner waitress named Marla noticed Dora staring at a county foreclosure notice. It advertised an auction in Blackwood the following afternoon. One listing stopped her cold. Item 42. A neglected Victorian house that had stood mostly untouched for more than 2 decades. Opening bid, $1. Beneath the address, someone had written 3 unsettling words. Ask about Vance. Dora read the words again. The same surname from the will. The same town. The same trail her father had tried to erase. She folded the notice and slipped it into her coat. With $14 and nowhere else to go, she headed for Blackwood. When she entered the crowded auction room, it fell completely silent as soon as she asked about item 42. The auctioneer lifted the gavel, but Dora raised her folded dollar first. The room turned toward her, as if she had announced she planned to buy a storm with pocket change. A few people laughed. Dora did not move, her thumb pressed against the triangle in her palm, while the auctioneer stared at the bill. Item 42, he said. $1. Nobody else moved. Dora looked through the window at the snow-covering Blackwood. Somewhere beyond those walls stood the house her father had warned someone to hide from her. She had no proof the warning and the property belonged together. She only had a question, and it had followed her across the country. The county clerk, Miriam Cole, slid a form across the table. Dora signed with a borrowed pen. The clerk frowned when she reached the ownership line. Your last name is Vance? Dora nodded. Miriam looked toward the auctioneer, then back at Dora. That is strange. Before Dora could ask why, the gavel struck. The house was hers. Sheriff Caleb Mercer followed her outside. He was gray-haired, carrying himself like a man who had spent years watching people make choices they later regretted. He pointed down the road. People leave that place alone. Dora tightened her coat. Why? Because the house has a history nobody agrees on. That answer should have frightened her. Instead, it pulled her closer. By late afternoon, Dora stood before the Victorian house. Ivy covered its stone walls. Broken windows stared through the snow. The porch sagged beneath years of neglect. Yet one thing stopped her cold. The front door was freshly repaired. Dora touched the new wood, then pulled her hand back. Someone had worked on this door recently. Inside, dust covered everything except a narrow path across the floor, as though someone had walked through the house not long ago. Dora followed it into the hallway and found a small brass plate beneath the peeling wallpaper. It read, Vance Family, 2001. Her breath caught. She peeled away more paper and found a second line beneath the name. Not the daughter. Dora stepped back. The words answered one question and created another. Why had her family name been placed inside a house thousands of miles away, and why had someone written those 3 words beneath it? Then, footsteps sounded overhead. Dora looked toward the ceiling. One slow step, then another. She climbed the staircase, following the sound, until she reached a narrow door sealed with an old padlock. The footsteps stopped. Dora placed her hand on the lock. For the first time since leaving California, she was no longer running from her family. She was standing above their secret. The padlock snapped at the first strike of Dora's crowbar. The attic door swung inward, releasing dust that turned silver in the weak winter light. Dora covered her mouth and stepped inside. A child's wooden chair stood beside the only window, with a photograph resting on its seat. Dora picked it up. Her knees weakened, but she refused to sit down or look away. Three people stood outside Blackwood House in 2001. Her father, Arthur, looked younger than she had ever known him. Beside him stood a woman Dora did not recognize. Between them was a tiny girl, barely old enough to walk. The girl was Dora. All her life, Arthur had told her that California was where her story began. But this photograph placed her in New York as a baby. The woman beside Arthur was holding Dora's hand. Dora turned the photograph over. Written in blue ink were 6 words: "She deserves the truth when she is ready." A floorboard creaked behind her. Dora spun around. Caleb stood in the doorway. His eyes were fixed on the photograph. "You knew," Dora said. Caleb shook his head. "Not all of it." He stepped inside and pointed toward the chair. "That woman was Eleanor Vance." Dora stared at him. "She lived here before Arthur took you away." Caleb removed a county record from his coat. The house was not abandoned in 2001. It was placed under temporary guardianship. Dora read the record. Eleanor Vance had requested protection for a child named Dora before disappearing from public records. There was no explanation. Only one signature, Eleanor's. Beneath it was Arthur's name, crossed out so violently the paper had nearly torn. Dora's fingers found the dollar in her pocket. She folded one corner, then stopped. For years, that little ritual had helped her believe broken things could be repaired. Now she wondered whether the thing broken inside her was her home, her family, or the story she had been told about herself. Caleb pointed toward the photograph again. "There is something else." He indicated Dora's coat. A small silver button showed near her collar. Dora recognized it immediately. She had seen its matching pair on a coat her father kept locked away in California. Caleb lowered his voice. "That means Arthur did not bring you here by accident." Dora stared at the photograph. The first truth was clear. Her family had lied about where her childhood began. But the larger question was harder. If Eleanor had been protecting her, why had Arthur taken her away? And why had someone waited 25 years for Dora to return? A car door slammed below. Dora rushed to the attic window. A black SUV had stopped beside the house. Someone had followed her, and whoever sat inside had arrived before she could uncover the rest. The SUV door opened, and Dora froze as a woman stepped into the snow. She was not Julian. She was the woman from the photograph. Dora stared through the attic window until the woman lifted her face. Eleanor Vance looked older, thinner, and tired, but unmistakably alive. Caleb caught Dora before she could rush downstairs. "Wait." Minutes later, Eleanor entered the attic carrying nothing. She looked at Dora and began to cry. That was when the mystery changed. Eleanor explained that Arthur had not stolen Dora from her. He had taken Dora away because Eleanor had asked him to. In 2001, Eleanor discovered that the family situation had become more dangerous than she could handle alone. But the greatest danger was not money. It was Dora's childhood. Arthur had promised Eleanor that he would raise Dora far from Blackwood until she was old enough to choose her own life. The property had belonged to Eleanor's parents, but they lost it through debt and grief. Eleanor rebuilt it slowly, then placed it in Dora's name. Dora stared at her. "Why did you let me believe I wasn't wanted?" Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd come back before you were ready." Then came the hardest truth. Arthur had not abandoned Dora. He had protected her from Eleanor's own despair after the tragic loss of her husband. He raised Dora as his daughter because Eleanor believed she could not give the child the stable life she deserved. The cruelest part was that Dora's family had not been separated by greed. They had been separated by fear. Julian's eviction had shattered that old arrangement. But even Julian had acted out of confusion. because Arthur had left one final instruction in his records. Never reveal Blackwood to Dora until she turned 25 and was ready to face the truth. Dora understood the warning in the will now. She had not been discarded. She had finally been released. Yet one choice remained. Eleanor wanted Dora to forgive the years of silence. Dora could not erase them, but she could decide what happened next. For the first time, Dora reached for another person's hand instead of pulling away. When Eleanor took it, Dora realized the house had never been waiting for a lost fortune. It had been waiting for her. At sunrise, Dora opened the front door and let the cold morning air fill the house. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table while Dora placed the old family photograph above the fireplace. She kept the $1 bill. It carried Evelyn's lesson. Broken things deserved another chance. Dora could not recover the lost years or erase Arthur's choices, but she could choose what they meant. She kept Blackwood House as proof that she had finally found where she belonged. Weeks later, she opened the front room to neighbors who needed warmth, tools, or simply somewhere to sit. The house became a place where people were welcomed. That evening, Dora stood on the porch, smoothing the folded dollar safely inside her coat. At the beginning, she believed being kicked out completely meant she had been rejected. Now, she understood. Sometimes a door closes because someone wants you gone. Sometimes it closes because another one is waiting. And this time, Dora chose to walk through it. If Dora's story reminded you that sometimes losing everything can be the beginning of finding where you truly belong, subscribe and stay with us for the next story of courage, mystery, and second chances.